So you're a South Carolina girl, born and raised. I want to ask you though, when you decided to get into the legal profession, did you find the law or did the law find you? How did you decide this is what you wanted to do?
I think I kind of stumbled into law school. I was very young when I started law school. I was under the age of 21. And when I graduated law school, I was the age that most people would graduate college. While I was in law school, I was injured in a car accident. My mother's been injured in a car accident. And so I found that to be a problem that I could help people with because I could relate to that kind of problem. I had been in those shoes before. I made my own mistakes, and I thought you're oftentimes in the best position to help the person you once were, or
Mhm.
the things that you have personally experienced. Usually you're in a better position to help advise people who might be going through something similar.
Now, I have to ask you this because we spoke to some attorneys down in Charleston. You have a reputation as being a very aggressive, no holds barred, take no prisoners type of attorney. Is that a reputation you relish?
They say that, I say I have a low tolerance for nonsense. I believe that time is very valuable. I do not like to see time or resources wasted. So I appreciate and respect people who are efficient with time and resources. And I do tend to get irritated when people are causing frivolous delays.
Well, you've also, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you about this case in particular, you've got experience going up against some big corporations, and you've also got a reputation, as we heard from our friends in the Charleston bar, of taking on some of these deep-pocketed, entrenched corporations with huge legal teams. Is that another reputation you don't mind having?
I don't mind having it. Definitely want to stand up for the underdog and stand up for the little guy because they're the ones who need advocacy the most.
No doubt. Let's talk a little bit about this case. And obviously, we're going to focus on sort of the background to this crime, not necessarily the crime itself. But I got to ask you this. That morning, earlier this month, when the news broke out of Midtown Manhattan that this shooting had taken place, what was the first thing that went through your mind?
You know, just kind of a shrug. I certainly didn't stop what I was doing for the day. I had my own cases and my own clients that I was assisting. But it definitely has brought to light a big issue that hasn't been discussed and hasn't had a spotlight shown on it before. So often, when these negative events happen, they often can be a catalyst to influence a good change and have a positive outcome.
Well, let me ask you about that because in the aftermath of this shooting, certainly perceptions have morphed amongst a lot of folks following it. In fact, you've been tracking a lot of the reaction to this. Let me ask you this question. How has your perception of this event changed from the moment it happened?
I think that it's going to have a positive change on how health insurance companies evaluate claims and how adjusters handle these claims. I think it's going to help them remember that the people who they are evaluating claims for are real people, they have real families, and they're not just a number on a paper or information in a software system.
Let's talk about some of these numbers. The third quarter earnings for United Healthcare that were announced at this investor conference the day that the CEO was murdered, $100.8 billion. Revenues in the coming year projected $450 billion. That is a lot of money. I wanted to read a quote to you, though. This is from one of the articles actually you sent me. It was part of the States Network, the States Newsroom Network. And it was a guest column by a gentleman by the name of Will Humble. Here's what he said. Health insurers make money by not paying for health care. Their bottom line depends on refusing to pay for care, and they are ruthless when it comes to protecting their profits. Now, is the argument here that these corporate revenues and the shareholder profits which flow from them coming on the backs of patients who are being denied care they should have gotten? Is that what's happening here?
That's exactly what's happening here. And some information that the insurance companies don't want to disclose and don't want us to know or talk about is how much money they allocate and spend towards advertising and marketing to get new policyholders in versus how much they have allocated to giving existing policyholders what they've paid for when they need it.
It's almost like the Ponzi scheme. Get new investors so you can, except they're pocketing tons of money. But let me ask you this, though. The fact we're talking about these situations, these claims, these corporate structures, let's go to those 3 bullets that were found on the sidewalk there in Midtown Manhattan, the words that were inscribed on them: deny, delay, depose. You're very familiar with these tactics, Victoria. Walk us through them.
I'm very familiar with those tactics. In certain states, there is actually a window of time, and it could be 30 days or 60 days that upon a claim being presented to the insurance company, they have at least that much time to make an initial response. That in and of itself is a delay. Certainly you need to give insurance companies reasonable time to evaluate claims, but they often take advantage of that. They often ask for extensions that I have found are not needed. When you question the reason that an extension is needed, usually the response is, well, it's just a common courtesy. It's just customary. And they don't have a real reason that they need to continue extending the evaluation period.
And this is just the beginning of the process of ultimately not taking responsibility. Is that correct? This is just the first part of that, first step in that evasion, alleged
Yes,
evasion.
yes. I mean, in South Carolina, if you were to file a lawsuit for injury sustained in a car wreck today, you are very likely not getting a trial date for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes longer. We've certainly got cases in various counties across the state now where the wreck happened 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago, and the injured person is still waiting to receive the compensation that they're entitled to.
What are some of the other strategies employed by these insurance companies along the same lines of this delay?
So, in certain instances, the insurance companies will be incentivized to hire defense lawyers to create delay tactics to keep a case away from the courthouse steps, if you will. And they do that oftentimes because it is cheaper to pay the lawyer to cause delays than it is to actually pay the claim. And that's because when an insurance company is collecting premiums for policies, they are putting those premiums in various accounts, one to spend on advertising, maybe to spend on building a new sports stadium or something like that. And then they've got a certain amount allocated based on what they think their risk threshold is for that policy period. They know there's going to be claims, but they know not everyone is going to bring a claim. So they'll have a certain percentage, and they have all kinds of ways that they try to calculate and determine what that is going to be. They will keep that money that is allocated towards paying claims in an interest-bearing account. So that money is making money as long as it's sitting there. But once it goes towards paying the claims and it's removed from that account, they're no longer earning their interest. And oftentimes the interest that they are earning in keeping money away from claimants exceeds the amount that they are paying the lawyers to cause the delays.
So lawyers aren't cheap, though. That's a considerable amount of interest money then that is accruing.
Yes, and it is a very, very much more considerable amount of money that they are spending on advertising, on commercials. Commercials are not cheap.
So let me ask you this. You told me about a case, goes on and on, several years. You're pushing for a certain just, equitable settlement for your injured client. They refuse, and then 3 years down the road, 3.5 years down the road, they finally come to you and say, okay, we're ready. Is that sort of this process at work? At that point, have they made enough money from holding on to it that they can now release it? Is that the gig?
Over the course of my career, I have seen decisions change seemingly overnight with no new information or developments in the case. And you have to wonder, well, why? Why are you paying now? After you have withheld and you've had every excuse in the book for so long, well, it's time for them to release that money because they have a whole new batch of claims that they can delay for the next 3 to 5 years in paying on.
You also talked about a part of this delay strategy being employing the same law firms in multiple states with multiple cases where they're always conflicted, so that anytime a judge says, okay, we're going to hold a hearing on this particular case, oh, we're sorry, we can't be there. Is that also part of it?
We do see very commonly certain insurance defense firms who seem to always be overextended, who seem to always have high turnover rates with employees and always have some excuse to the court of why a matter cannot go forward. And they will request continuances, which is a delay tactic.
Yeah. All these delays, the denials, is it a scheme? I mean, we talked earlier about those massive numbers from United Healthcare. Other insurers have similar huge, huge revenue. However, in the aftermath of this shooting, we've seen United stock price plummet. It's now down under $500 from where it was earlier this year. Over, I believe it was over $650 at one point a share. But this strategy, have they done the math here? Is this just is there a formula somewhere that says, okay, we'll hold a case this long, we'll deny these types of claims for this long?
It's definitely an intentional strategy. It's a business plan, and they have their bean counters and accountants figuring out the numbers and doing the math, if you will.
So it's sort of like an actuarial game
Yes.
with people's lives and people's livelihoods.
Well, and I will say individuals they get worn down. And there is a strategy that insurance companies employ to really exhaust the individual claimant to where they give up. After so much time, they start to think, well, this is hopeless. I'm fighting this fight, and I seem to be going nowhere. That happens very frequently. That is why a lot of times cases do get resolved on the courthouse steps, because the claimant has waited for so long for their day in court, and you get on the courthouse steps, all of a sudden the insurance company, through its defense attorneys, say, hey, we're going to do what we should have done 2 years ago. At that point, a lot of the claimants want the case to be over with. They want to go on about their lives. So there is a strategy in prolonging how long someone has to wait for resolution.
So it not only benefits them financially holding on to that money and earning interest, but also it wears down the opposition.
Exactly.
Makes your job difficult, I'd imagine.
Well, I wouldn't have a job if insurance companies did the right thing. People wouldn't need lawyers like me to fight for them if claims were evaluated fairly and reasonably.
Victoria, the fact we're even talking about this scheme to pad these profits, to deny, delay, the fact we're even talking about this is due to Luigi Mangione at this point, isn't it? I mean, can we argue the morals of the act aside, he succeeded in driving this debate, correct?
Yes, and I think that was clearly a part of his plan. I think there's a lot of details that we don't know yet about motivation and about how long the plan had been in place and what he ultimately wanted to accomplish, but he certainly accomplished something.
Yeah, he said these parasites had it coming.
Strong words.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, you'd talked to me about this before. We talked about President-elect Donald Trump had addressed this. He referred to the support that Mangione has received as emblematic of a sickness in our country. Do you think that's true as well?
I don't think that we can condone murder. This was certainly a premeditated murder, and that's in violation of our laws, and we can't condone that. So I don't think it's healthy as a society to condone it, but I do think the positive kind of silver lining that came out of this is that there is widespread discussion on what insurance companies are doing against the people, to harm the people who have paid them money to have these policies that are supposed to be there to protect them when they need it.
And so we've got this guy, though. I mean, 4 documentaries in the works, over 100,000 raised for his legal defense. His social media is blowing up. I read somewhere 80% of the comments on the assassination were about this very issue of healthcare and denial of claims. So, can we separate the act from the motive?
That's a tough question. I think that there was a noble motive in bringing to light injustices that are occurring on such a widespread basis, not just to people who need medical care, but to the actual medical providers. They have grievances about how health insurance companies handle claims. And when you get to a point where you're treating medical providers so poorly, I think that that really becomes a problem for society, in that the competent, skilled, compassionate medical providers that we want to provide care for us and our loved ones, they say this isn't for me, and they go find some other career path to go down. They say, why am I going to go into all of this medical debt and spend years and years of school to be treated so poorly when I just want to get paid a reasonable value for the services that I'm providing? I don't think that that's good for our society. And I think what that results in ultimately long term is having less competent, less skilled medical providers. That's not what we want to promote as a society.
Well, I want to ask you about that because we're talking about this in the context of this healthcare marketplace that we all live in. And I wanted to throw another quote at you. This was one of my favorite authors, P.J. O'Rourke, back when Hillary Clinton was first pushing the early iterations of what many conservatives refer to as socialized medicine. But he said, and I quote, "If you think healthcare is expensive now, wait until you see what it costs when it's free." And if you look at the history of healthcare expenditures in America back in the 70s, it was at 71 billion a year. Entering this millennium, it increased to over 1.4 trillion a year. It is now over 4.6 trillion. And even after you adjust for inflation, and we've seen rampant inflation recently, even after you adjust for inflation, those costs have gone up over 108% since the turn of the millennium. And again, that's 5 times population growth. So these costs are out of control. There's also a recent report from OECD, the national or international group, which revealed that 84% of that healthcare spending in this country is government directed. I mean, we're literally 5 percentage points behind communist Cuba. Is there an argument to be made that our government has created this problem?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the rising healthcare cost is not just when we look at our society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
The United States, we allow food products that other countries have totally banned because the research has shown this is harmful to your health. In the United States, we seem to almost promote an unhealthy lifestyle, and in certain instances, it's kind of being glamorized to have an unhealthy lifestyle, which I don't agree with. And I think that the overall cost of healthcare has risen as a result of lifestyle choices that should be avoided, but that we are constantly being promoted through advertisement. And who is doing the advertising? It's the big pocket corporations.
Yeah. I mean, you've got creating the disease and then providing the cure. It's a good racket, isn't it?
Well, I think providing treatment, not always providing a cure, but providing some type of medication that can mask a certain less desirable symptom,
Yeah,
but
we
is
don't want
not
to cure
actually
them, right?
curing the root of the problem.
Yeah, God forbid we cure anybody. No, that's a great point. I want to ask you this. Just this week, libertarian-leaning group out of Washington, D.C., the Cato Institute, has unveiled its recommendations for the incoming administration of President-elect Donald Trump. They are arguing that the current system, which, again, provides a lot of employer authorization and which really kind of creates a top-heavy system of insurance, they're arguing, let's scrap that completely. And instead, let's take that money, give it to individuals, let them put it in health savings accounts, and then let them go out and find the insurer and provider that fits their needs best. What do you think about that idea?
I like that idea. I think folks should be able to retain the right to choose which doctors they go to, what treatment they choose to get or decline. We see oftentimes in the workers' compensation system, somebody has been hurt on the job and they have a workers' comp claim. The workers' comp insurance carrier decides which doctors you're going to see. And of course, they want you to see the cheapest ones.
Yeah, and corporate plans too. It drives a lot of these problems. And Victoria, I got to ask you this because we're talking about a lot of numbers here, but you see this directly. You see the impact on people's lives, on their livelihoods every day.
I certainly see the toll that it takes in seeing a case from start to finish, particularly if the case goes into litigation. Not all cases do, but there are many, many instances where people literally die waiting for their day in court, waiting for their claim to be heard.
So let's say you're a South Carolinian, you're paying through the nose on health insurance, both employer and employee. You're in an accident, you're denied care, you're denied coverage, you're denied reimbursement, you're denied, you have to pick this up yourself. What kind of advice would you give to South Carolinians who are struggling in this new landscape in which we find ourselves? I mean, how do you protect yourself, your family, your livelihood from this racket?
Well, you got to get a good lawyer on your side to fight for you.
Yeah.
And, lawyers are often blamed for increasing insurance premiums, which is a big misconception. It couldn't be further from the truth. As I stated earlier, people wouldn't need lawyers if insurance companies did the right thing.
Yeah. Victoria, this case, again, has sparked a huge flood of recrimination for a lot of these insurers and providers. Let me ask you this question as we close this out. Where do you think this debate goes? Do you think we will see meaningful reform like we talked about with the HSAs? Do you think anything good comes of this long term?
I'm optimistic that something good will come from this long term. What we're currently seeing, the kind of immediate reaction, is we're seeing a lot of insurance companies start to conceal the identity of the decision makers because they are fearful that there might be retribution. Somebody might be after them for vengeance. If you do the right thing, usually you don't have to worry about somebody lurking in the shadows.
So, Victoria, as we look at the fallout from this, as we look at where this debate goes, we talked about a ton of things here. Do you think there's a positive outcome from this long term for healthcare consumers in America, for those who are dealing with significant injuries or just illnesses that should receive coverage? Do you see a silver lining here?
I am optimistic that the level of debate and attention that has arisen as a result of this event is going to encourage the decision makers, the corporate decision makers up top down to the adjuster level, to be more reasonable, to evaluate claims fairly, expediently. People are paying for insurance. They hope that they don't need it, but when they do, they expect it to be there to do what they agreed to do.
That's right. So just do the right thing. And again, consequences like this, you can avoid them.
Yes.
Good stuff. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.